Have you ever felt a strange unease when talking with someone? That inexplicable feeling that something's not right, even though you can't quite put your finger on it. Carl Jung, one of the most profound psychologists in history, spent decades observing these exact moments. Through his clinical work, he uncovered something remarkable. There are silent signals that reveal psychological dangers far more concerning than any obvious threat. These warning signs don't announce themselves through aggressive words or obvious toxic behavior. They operate beneath the surface, and precisely because of their subtlety, they're infinitely more dangerous. What's truly alarming is that these signals often appear in people who seem completely normal, even charming or charismatic. Ancient wisdom traditions hinted at these patterns, but Jung gave us the psychological framework to understand them. When you learn to recognize these 5 warning signs, you'll understand exactly when it's time to create distance from someone. Let's explore the first and perhaps most common of these signals. Imagine this scenario. You're having a conversation with someone who suddenly attributes thoughts, intentions, or negative qualities to you that you never expressed or demonstrated. It feels jarring because they're responding not to you, but to a distorted version they've created in their mind. Sound familiar? What you're experiencing in that moment is shadow projection in its purest form. The shadow, as Jung defined it, represents everything we reject about ourselves, aspects we find unacceptable and push into our unconscious. But these elements don't simply vanish. They accumulate energy in the depths of our psyche, seeking expression. When someone consistently projects their shadow onto you, they're revealing one of the most dangerous psychological patterns Jung identified: the complete inability to recognize their denied aspects in themselves. The danger lies in the fact that from their perspective, you really are embodying those negative qualities. They aren't consciously lying. They genuinely see in you what they cannot accept in themselves. This perceptual distortion creates a particular type of conviction that can be extraordinarily persuasive. The person projecting can even convince others that you are exactly as they describe you. Modern psychology has confirmed Jung's insights. Our brains literally filter reality to validate our existing beliefs. But in cases of massive shadow projection, this filter becomes a complete distortion of reality. The warning sign appears when you notice a profound disconnect between what someone claims about your motivations and your actual internal experience. They accuse you with absolute certainty, seemingly immune to any contrary evidence. What's really happening? You've unwittingly become the battlefield for their internal war against parts of themselves they cannot face. The second warning sign Jung identified emerges through an unusual combination of moral certainty and an unwavering sense of purpose. This psychological pattern is particularly deceptive because it masquerades as wisdom or moral clarity rather than revealing itself as the danger it truly is. Jung termed this phenomenon psychic inflation, a state where an individual's sense of self expands beyond normal human boundaries. What makes this warning sign so difficult to detect is that it often appears as conviction rather than confusion, as strength rather than weakness. You'll recognize this pattern when you encounter someone who expresses complete certainty about complex moral or spiritual matters. They don't simply hold strong opinions. They position themselves as direct channels of truth or goodness. Their language leaves no room for doubt, questions, or the natural limitations of human understanding. This goes far beyond ordinary confidence or expertise. Where healthy confidence acknowledges boundaries and remains open to correction, inflation creates a psychological fortress impervious to new information. As Swiss analyst Marie-Louise von Franz noted, this state paradoxically combines grandiosity with a peculiar loss of personality. The person becomes a mouthpiece for abstract principles rather than a nuanced individual. The psychological mechanism at work involves a merging between the limited human ego and universal archetypal energies, especially those related to wisdom, justice, or spiritual insight. The person unconsciously identifies with these larger-than-life patterns, experiencing themselves as an embodiment of cosmic forces rather than as one perspective among many. Spiritual traditions worldwide recognize this danger. German mystic Meister Eckhart called it the subtlest trap on the spiritual path. Zen traditions named it Zen sickness, while Sufis spoke of the veil of light, more dangerous than the veil of darkness because it's harder to recognize as an obstacle, the unmistakable sign. This person never doubts their own motivations. While history's great sages expressed deep humility before existence's mysteries, those suffering from psychic inflation exhibit absolute certainty. They don't consider the possibility of error because in their mind, they're expressing universal truths, not personal opinions. What makes this state particularly dangerous is its charismatic quality. Jung observed how leaders with severe psychic inflation attracted devoted followers precisely because of the absolute conviction they radiated. This certainty satisfies our human craving for security and definitive answers in an uncertain world. You can recognize ego inflation by observing how someone responds to disagreement. The inflated ego doesn't process questioning as useful information, but as an affront to the cosmic order itself. They interpret opposition not as legitimate human disagreement, but as resistance to the good, truth, or divine that they represent. Have you ever met someone who seemed too perfect, too polished in every social situation? Jung identified this as a profound warning sign. When someone displays a social adaptation so flawless that it lacks any natural human inconsistency or vulnerability. The persona, Jung's term for our social face, becomes something unnatural when it never slips, never reveals the messy humanity underneath. This excessive perfection signals a serious psychological danger, the complete separation between outer presentation and inner reality. The person has become so invested in their social image that they've lost touch with their authentic self. The Swiss psychoanalyst Guggenbühl Craig called this the emptiness behind the mask, where someone has crafted such a convincing exterior that even they begin to forget the difference between their performance and their truth. The warning sign emerges when you experience a strange sense of artificiality with someone. Their behavior is technically flawless. They always know what to say, how to act, what facial expressions to adopt, yet it lacks the natural inconsistencies of authentic humanity. Contemporary neuroscience offers fascinating support for Jung's observations. Our brains contain mirror neurons that detect subtle incongruities between verbal, facial, and bodily expressions. When someone's social mask is completely divorced from their inner reality, these neurons generate a warning signal we experience as inexplicable unease or distrust. The real danger lies in what this extreme dissociation conceals. When someone invests all their psychic energy in maintaining a perfect external image, the rejected aspects don't disappear. They accumulate in the unconscious, forming what Jung called the shadow. And the more rigid the persona, the more chaotic and potentially destructive their shadow becomes when it eventually emerges. Marie-Louise von Franz, Jung's close collaborator, observed that those presenting perfect social adaptation often experience shadow eruptions, moments where all repressed energy explodes in unpredictable ways. This dynamic explains why the apparently most perfect people can sometimes commit surprisingly destructive acts. If you've found value in understanding these psychological patterns so far, consider subscribing to this channel. We regularly explore the depths of human psychology and how it affects our daily relationships. Now, let's get back to the video and explore the next warning signs. You've likely experienced this eerie phenomenon. Mid-conversation, someone undergoes a subtle transformation. Their physical appearance hasn't changed, but suddenly their voice takes on a different quality, their eyes hold an unusual intensity, and their entire presence shifts. It's as if another force has temporarily taken control of their personality. Jung recognized this disturbing pattern and named it archetypal possession, when unconscious primordial energies overwhelm a person's normal identity. This might be the most unnerving psychological warning sign we can encounter in everyday life. In Jung's framework, archetypes function as universal psychological templates that structure human experience across all cultures. These powerful forces normally operate beneficially beneath conscious awareness. However, when one archetype dominates consciousness completely, the individual's unique personality becomes submerged beneath these transpersonal energies, creating a psychological imbalance that affects everyone in their orbit. Shamanic traditions perfectly understood this phenomenon. Anthropologist Mircea Eliade documented how shamans differentiated between controlled states of channeling and dangerous states of possession where individual identity was completely subsumed. Christian mysticism spoke of discernment of spirits as the essential ability to distinguish beneficial psychic influences from potentially destructive ones. The warning sign appears when you notice someone has lost normal psychological flexibility, becoming rigidly identified with a single archetypal pattern. The unquestionable savior, the relentless warrior, the perpetual victim, the infallible judge. The specific archetype matters less than the complete identification with it. Revealing indicators include a strange intensity in the eyes, a monolithic quality in speech, and a peculiar feeling that the person is no longer fully present in the ordinary sense. As Jungian analyst Robert Moore noted, you're no longer relating to a complete human personality, but to an archetypal fragment that has seized control of consciousness. What makes this particularly dangerous is that the person possessed by an archetype experiences an extraordinary sense of certainty and purpose. The ambiguity of ordinary consciousness disappears, replaced by absolute conviction that can be extremely persuasive to others. Jung observed how political and religious leaders in states of archetypal possession could catalyze mass movements precisely because of this superhuman certainty. The fundamental danger lies in the fact that archetypes contain extreme polarities. The same archetype of the savior contains both the potential for redemptive compassion and destructive fanaticism. When someone becomes completely identified with an archetype, they inevitably manifest its darkest aspects, often without any awareness of the contradiction. Jung identified a particularly troubling warning sign that manifests as an eerie form of psychological repetition. It's the strange phenomenon where someone continuously recreates identical painful circumstances throughout their life. Different settings, different characters, but somehow the same distressing outcome occurs with remarkable consistency. When someone continually recreates identical painful scenarios across different relationships and contexts, you're witnessing a powerful, unconscious force at work. The true danger emerges when you begin to feel strangely scripted in your interactions with them, as if you're being nudged to play a specific role in their recurring drama. The first time is chance, the second time is coincidence, the third time is a pattern, as the saying goes. Jung recognized that these patterns reveal unhealed psychological wounds seeking resolution through repetition. The person doesn't deliberately choose these painful cycles. They're driven by unconscious material that operates beyond their awareness or control. Psychotherapist Bessel van der Kolk describes this as the body keeping the score, where unprocessed experiences create persistent templates that filter and shape new encounters. Early formative relationships and experiences become the invisible blueprint for future connections, often with disturbing accuracy. You can identify this warning sign when you notice someone expressing genuine bewilderment at their terrible luck while describing essentially identical relationship dynamics with different people. They might say things like, "I always end up with controlling partners," or "nobody ever appreciates what I contribute," yet remain blind to their own role in selecting and maintaining these situations. Brain research provides fascinating insight into this mechanism. Neuroplasticity researcher Norman Doidge explains how neural circuits formed during significant experiences become self-reinforcing over time. The brain literally becomes wired to perceive, interpret, and respond along familiar pathways, even when these pathways lead to suffering. What makes this pattern particularly hazardous in relationships is its magnetic pull. Without conscious awareness, someone caught in these loops broadcasts subtle cues that invite precisely the responses needed to complete their familiar narrative. Psychiatrist Mark Epstein calls this the trauma magnet, where we unconsciously arrange circumstances to confirm our deepest, often painful, beliefs about ourselves and others. Before you realize it, you might find yourself behaving in ways that are uncharacteristic but somehow feel unavoidable with this person. That unsettling feeling indicates you've been drawn into someone else's unresolved psychological terrain, a clear signal to step back and reassess the relationship dynamic. If these 5 warning signs reveal the deepest psychological dangers, according to Jung, there is a transformative path that transcends these threats: the conscious integration of the shadow. This process represents the fundamental difference between psychologically dangerous people and those embarking on the journey towards psychic wholeness. Shadow integration doesn't mean moral perfection or absence of negative aspects. On the contrary, it implies a humble recognition of our own capacity for all the errors and darkness we observe in others. As Jung expressed, "I would rather be whole than good," a frequently misunderstood phrase that points to the difference between authentic psychological integrity and a mask of perfection hiding dangerous internal divisions. The indicators of someone who has genuinely begun this integration process are unmistakable. A unique combination of honesty about their own shadows and compassion toward the shadows of others. This person can acknowledge their problematic impulses without excessive shame or self-indulgence, simply as aspects of the human condition requiring constant awareness. What's truly transformative about this process is that, paradoxically, consciously recognizing our most difficult aspects dramatically decreases the likelihood of unconsciously acting them out. As Jungian analyst Robert Johnson observed, what we deny does not disappear. It simply emerges in forms over which we have less control. Before we part ways, reflect on this. Have you recognized any of these warning signs in important people in your life? Or perhaps more crucially, have you detected aspects of these patterns in yourself? Awareness is the first step toward transformation. The journey to psychological wholeness begins with recognizing these unconscious forces that shape our relationships and our lives. Remember, Jung didn't identify these patterns to make us fearful, but to illuminate the path toward greater consciousness. By learning to recognize these warning signs, we gain not just protection from psychological danger, but the opportunity to transform our own shadows into sources of wisdom and creativity.